everybody. Welcome back to another episode of this mess that we call MRO Essentials. And today we've got a guest. We decided to bring in some people to support us because we're running out of stuff to talk about. Just kidding.
Yeah, right.
We've We've got Mark Cooper here from PM11. So, Mark, thank you for coming on board and letting us pepper you with a bunch of questions and discuss all the things with EAM and SCM. What we're going to talk about here, Mark and Justin, is we're going to vaguely talk around. We're going to mention the fight night that we did in South Africa, and we're doing that here in Australia, which I'll explain in a little bit. And then kind of go into the topics that we did in fight night. So fight night was a concept that typically happens on site. It was maintenance and supply chain, always pointing the fingers at each other, going at it for all the wrong reasons, really. And we kind of bring that to a head and talk about it. So with that kind of theme and mindset that we're going to do again in early June on the Gold Coast, we thought we'd talk to Mark around those topics, which is around the finger pointing, the data, the planning and scheduling that drives our supply chain. So with that said, Justin, let me hand over to you.
Yeah, really glad to have you, Mark. Thanks for joining us. It'd probably be good if we let you introduce yourself before we get started here, if you don't mind, and then we'll dive into our punching each other in the face time.
Yeah. I haven't been a party to this, but I'm interested to see how it all goes. I'm old, so I end up being around.
He's older than me.
Exactly. Started in operational roles in mining in particular in the when was that, the 80s, and then moved into more systems work in the 90s, and then that sort of was a logical step really because I was always intrigued about how to improve things. And if you are a young person and you're intrigued about getting processes working better, jump into systems because you can actually make a real impact. In any case, I ended up leaving operational roles and doing some mostly systems implementation work, predominantly in Latin America for a few years, and then back into Australia with BHP in order to lead up one of the streams to go towards their first global SAP push. And that was a good exercise, although I didn't really want to see that through. I really was keen to get out of there as soon as I could. But look, they did a great job really in the end. They spent a lot of money, but I think they're getting some of the benefits now from standardized.
Absolutely.
So yeah, spent a few years at BHP and then pretty much out of that into consulting and have been in the SAP space for the last 25 years. So spend a lot of time around good businesses, bad businesses, and I think that's sort of what we want to talk about, right?
Absolutely.
Well, let me jump in there, Justin, because this is straight away with, because you did GSAP and I did OneSAP with BHP, and the foundational focus was data, get your data right. And one thing that always bugged me, Mark, with BHP's re-implementation of SAP was they made a decision to only do taskless.
Yeah.
And this is SAP. Only do taskless and not do BOMs.
Yeah.
And so we're talking about all the data and the foundation. So I'm keen to get your impression on the good, the bad, the ugly of that decision.
Yeah. Look, I think for all the benefits of BHP, anyone from BHP watching, look, you're all great. But
it's a great implementation.
That time, and I was sort of on the outer of OneSAP, but we did have Tim Christensen involved in OneSAP at the time. His feedback really was that they missed a lot of opportunities, and I think some of it related to how they took the broader perspective that they will not have any changes to SAP, even though they did have many changes to SAP, many customizations, but it was almost throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And, as you know, BOMs are sort of almost guarantee accuracy, making certain you don't end up with waste. And if you can identify all the key spare parts in a BOM and actually have them up to date, then you'll get the right parts in the end. But if you don't, you won't. And so, and BOMs are important from both maintenance and a supply chain point of view, obviously. So,
absolutely.
I don't know why they chose that sort of decision. There was a whole bunch of decisions, but I think they've relaxed that a little bit. They've learnt to grow a little bit differently as they've gone forward. They haven't totally relaxed, but they've been able to leverage their SAP across the world. Which
it's interesting because I get in the argument a lot of time. A lot of companies that say, "Well, what's the difference? We've built taskless." I'm like, Yeah, but how often have you used a task list? Because from a supply chain perspective, I'm really driving bombs more and more now. Because if we have a material stocked in a warehouse that was bought in stock, which means you need it at arm's length, but it's not in a bomb, how do you know it's even there if they don't
Good
have the
luck.
skills and the ability to look, which they, a lot of times they don't. And this, again, this is not finger pointing, it's reality. But if
Yeah.
you've got that bomb structure there and says, okay, there's the assembly. Oh yeah, there's the bearings and the housings I need. They're right there. Sweet. And then they
Yeah.
use them.
Absolutely. Actually, I was only in a conversation with a customer the other day, and with Tim, the other partner of PM11, and we were challenging the customer as to, do you know what that part's for? You know, if you don't, then you know why you stock it. You know, you've got to know.
Yeah.
You've got to know what it's for, and the only link to knowing its purpose is through a bomb, really.
Exactly.
So to some degree, we sort of believe that the starting point for any organisation, if they want to improve, is determine all the parts that are needed. And actually, we were talking to that company. They're very advanced, but they were also removing parts from bombs. And Tim sort of said, "No, why do you do that? Because it's actually you leave it there, just make it inactive or whatever, but then you'll actually know that it's something that you're not needing anymore, right?"
Yeah, exactly.
So it was almost like there's that reverse bomb sort of searchability as well. And so, yeah, I think that's the main link between maintenance and supply chain in the initial master data creation, and obviously task lists. Look, that's a different topic, but
Yeah. Very
So, hey,
if you're going to do some work, repeat work, why don't you put it in a task list, right?
Yeah. Sorry, Justin, go ahead.
yeah, I was going to say, Mark, when you guys start, this is a pretty common topic. Where do you start? Like, if a company or to you, if a customer comes to you and says, "Hey, we want to fix our demand signal or our planning and scheduling." I mean,
Hmm.
I've seen a lot of guys go in and just flat out fail because they don't have a systematic approach. And I think
Yeah.
I think it's really important for people to hear somebody that has 25 years of experience in this stuff. You know, give me a guiding philosophy on this and tell me what makes sense and how to think about that. Because a lot of people that are going to be listening to this are going to be thinking to themselves, "Man, this is hitting home, and I need to go talk to my boss about some support around this." Right? Like, how can I convince my supervisor to give me some funding?
Yeah, look, I think the starting point has got to be, look, in the maintenance space, obviously there's a lot of effort and time put into the equipment structure or the functional location structure in SAP, and look, that's good to do, but it's really you get it right or wrong pretty much when you start, and you can obviously improve, but it does take a little bit of effort to do that, and if you're not maintaining that all the time, like if you're not vigilant around that, then it can get a little bit out of control. But parking that aside, I think that the two key master data elements really is bombs and task lists. And so we ask them, you should start there. That will actually give you an indication about the purpose of the component, basically through the bomb, and then the repeatability of the components through the task list. And you'll then make the demand signal much clearer to supply chain. You'll be holding stuff that you really want to hold. I actually got called into a business, probably 5 or 10 years ago now, in Chile, and it was a sort of a supply chain review, but they really just wanted to know why their inventory was going up, and you had to look at it. Well, they were holding a whole bunch of obsolete stock. And they were buying more of it. They had no understanding of its purpose. That was the key.
Well, it's funny that somebody writes one off, and then the MRP goes, "Oh, well, you need another one," even though you haven't purchased it for 15 years.
Yeah.
It goes and replenishes your stock. So there's, getting rid of stock is a method to the madness. But going back, I run into people don't understand the difference between bombs and tasks, and the ones that do just see it as too hard.
Yeah.
It's just too much work. But then they end up with $100 million of inventory, and half of it's never moved or it's never going to move.
Yeah.
I mean, God, you could easily fund a whole team of people maintaining master data for the amount of waste that goes into the warehouse.
Yeah, and I think, look, that's why Lexin and PM11 are in business, really, to optimise that. But make it an easier task to actually update, right? Because obviously that is a challenge. People are time poor, and unfortunately, in the asset intensive industries, they're just hanging in there. They're just doing the basics. We were talking about this earlier. They're not thinking about strategic things. They're just thinking about, can I survive this week's plan?
Yeah.
And get the right.
And that's quite sad, because I tell them, I go in and I show them our POTOBs, our potentially slob review form. The first question, is it in a bomb? And they say, no, we don't do bombs. I'm like, well, then you've got a lot of work to do, because we're going to line in the sand, start today. When you catalog a material, put it in a bomb. That takes literally 5 seconds. Creating a bomb is super simple in most ERP systems. Then you've stopped the bleeding. Now you go back and start cleaning up, but it's part of standard work, is reviewing the materials that you have, just like equipment and flock change. As you change your plant, you've got to maintain it. And it's almost something people think, it's like, oh, I don't really want to do it. Do I need to do it? Should I do it? It should be a non-starter. It says this is foundational. You have to do this. If you want AI to assist you going forward, you have to have these building blocks in place.
Yeah. Well, theoretically, people count their inventory as well, right? But
it's a good point. Yeah, we count it all the time, once a year.
Yeah, there's challenges just with those compliance things, let alone thinking more broadly about what they should be doing. And so, I agree. I think if you're going to review your inventory, you review it from a perspective of what its purpose is and why you hold it, and that'll actually help you, hold the right amount of stock for the right reasons with the right signals and all those sorts of things. So, the interesting thing about that business in Chile is that they, really after that review, there was a few fundamental changes that were recommended. One was, putting things into a bomb. The second thing was, I think they had like $10 million worth of obsolete stock, and they dug a hole in the Atacama Desert and buried it. But that's sort of, you've got to, and they've got to get to a point where they understand what they've got, because really at that point they were still buying that stock. It was out of control. Like, they didn't really have a structure. But anyway, look, you see good and you see bad, eh?
Exactly. Well, Justin, I'm keen to. So, Justin, what you did in the oil and gas industry is still very interesting, because you changed the company you used to work for very, very quickly, and I think that still. I'm always still impressed by it, and I think you're too damn humble. But explain what you did, Justin. What was your decision, even if you didn't, right? Because when you do this, you're just the kind of person, let's make a decision and move on. If it's wrong, we'll fix it, but let's go.
Yeah, I like to test in production. That's my favorite. I'm just kidding, everybody.
No, you're not, because that's what I did.
Sort of, yeah. Question, Tim. What we did is we started with criticality, right? And I learned a long time ago that you never, from a supply chain standpoint, try to push this stuff. You reach out to your maintenance guys, you get them bought in, and let them help you identify what's important. So we climbed our asset registry, walked around in the field, spent some time with our operations guys, and looked at critical stuff first. And we made some rules around it, right? We said, hey, we're going to have a maintenance plan. We're going to have a task list. We're not going to skip the PMs. And by God, we're going to have a bomb tied to it. And, when you really have a true definition of criticality, it lets you focus on a very small pool, because, not everything's critical.
Yeah.
It should be maybe 10% of your assets. And that took off like wildfire.
Well, one thing on that, so that's actually a really good point you just mentioned. Step one, before you target your criticality, which is great, define it. Yeah. Because it's amazing how many companies come back and half of their equipment is critical.
Yeah. So Mark, your eyes lit up like
that's going to stop. So Mark,
tell us about what you guys do, Mark. I'm sure. Yeah.
How do you?
Well. Yeah. Look, criticality is pretty important. Obviously, critical, really. No, look, it's a challenge with most businesses, because the operations really want the equipment up all the time, and that could be an air conditioner. But at the end of the day, you define what's really critical.
Pretty critical, Mark. I got to be honest with you. AC at my house, pretty damn critical.
Yeah, you're right. But it's and look, in some parts of the world it is critical. But certainly if you got to there's some parts of this country that that have real challenges with heat and dealing
Yep.
dealing with all those environmental factors. But look, I think defining, you're right, Justin. If you can define it up front, I think that's where to start. Once it's done, then you can actually apply that rule across your bombs, your task lists, all your components, and actually really have a good understanding about what you're holding, why you're holding it. But the whole business has got to be on board about that. And to your point, Tim, you said before, no, it might have been you, Justin, it can't be driven by supply chain, right? It's got to be like a whole business decision. Let's do it this way. Let's make certain we hold the right stock, and then you can save money. But the unfortunate part about it is that, and it applies to maintenance as well, is there's a laziness associated with the way that people budget, the way they manage their business. Let's just cut 10%, but they don't think about, okay, what real changes can we make to actually make that 10%, right?
But Mark, it's interesting because every corporate has a risk matrix. But do the people within the maintenance and supply chain know about it? Generally, no, or they don't apply it because that's for corporates. And if you look at it, because it's usually from environmental, it's production or financial or whatever, they got just look at the financial impact. If this piece of equipment fails, where does it fall in this 2x2 matrix? Oh, it'd be there. Okay, so we agree it's not critical. Okay, it's going to hurt. No, but it's not critical, right? Okay, good. Let's move on to the next one. If the train loadout for a mine stops, what happens? We can't move coal. Well, that means revenue. That means critical. Okay, so train loadout, we agree. Everything in that area, that's going to be higher criticality than your HME. Just that gives them that foundation to start from to say, okay, now I understand what you're trying to say. Now I can move through my critical equipment much more quickly.
Yeah, totally agree. And look, there's whether it's coal, whether it's transportation, whether it's oil and gas, it's the same challenge. And there's a melee, I think, in terms of determining what's important and how to apply that risk matrix right down to the operational business. It takes a lot of work, but it takes a lot of and people are people, and some people like each other, some don't. There's people going for different jobs. There's all these other political factors that actually impact the business, and the ones that do it well are ones that are totally aligned. And I don't know whether you ever worked at Oz Minerals, Tim, but in the early days when they merged, I can't remember the businesses that merged together and made Oz Minerals, but they moved. Andrew, I can't think of his surname. He took over as CEO, moved the business to Adelaide.
Yep.
I went over there probably a few weeks after, and they had a whole executive boardroom taken up, and all the walls were taken up with a strategy.
Oh, wow.
Everything from operations, supply chain, maintenance, finance, HR, who we were going to hire, how we were going to do it.
Yeah.
It covered everything, and it all came from the top. They basically just find, where do we want to be? We want to be the best copper producer in whatever they define. And you could see how it all flowed down, and obviously they'd done a lot of work, but all management. It wasn't just, one set of management. They were small enough to be able to sort of say, you know what, we're going to do this. This is our target, and that's what they did. They ended up they took on. They worked on their new site, the Carapatina. They extended their current site. They got better. They implemented systems and support structures to help them. In the end, they've now been bought by BHP for probably, 30 times the multiple that they probably started with, right?
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
So I think that's the vision businesses should have, but it's a matter of harnessing all the management to the same story, right? And you don't see that often enough, really.
Yeah, it's funny. We talked about that in our fight night, and we go through an example. We did a workshop, and we go through an example of a production line and talk about what's critical. And we tell them, though, step one, what's the objective of the business?
Yeah.
And everybody got the answer wrong. And we told them this is a for-profit organization, so the objective is to make money. Whether you like it or not, It's about EBIT. It's about making money.
Yeah.
So once we got that to their heads, and we had a couple of finance people in the room, it was kind of eye-opening. They're like, okay, that makes sense. Maintenance, your job is to keep production running so we can make money. Supply chain, make sure they can supply them the parts they need to keep the machines running. And like you were just saying, it's keeping everybody aligned, whether they like it or not. Because if you're the CFO or you're the group CFO, your KPI is what? It's about the cash.
Yeah.
What are we doing? How are we performing financially? So that is often forgotten, and we go off these silos. Maintenance is over here saying, I got to do this, and supply chain says, I got to reduce inventory. That's not aligned with maintenance, which makes no sense.
Yeah.
And so I love that front. The point of the business, you get together, everybody put your strategy up. Number one, we're going to make money. Okay, how are we going to do that? How are we going to align KPIs to meet that KPI? And I think that's a really important piece, which leads straight to critical equipment, which is great because, okay, all right, let's focus on criticals because that's going to kill me. If that piece of equipment goes down, I could be down for a month if I don't have the spares in the warehouse. What a great step.
Totally agree. And yeah, look, the business is doing great things, but that harnessing of the power of all the managers is not often seen. And look, from a maintenance point of view, which is where we focus a lot of our time, the maintenance operation almost works in isolation, and they don't really engage. And I think we talked about recently, Tim. There's not many organisations that have a leader who looks after both supply chain and maintenance, but there is a few, and they seem to do things a little bit differently to the others, right?
They sure do. Enter Justin. Justin was one of those people, and not every corporation can do it for structural reasons, but when it does happen, and that person is well understanding of both, magic can occur.
Yes, totally, and people. That forces back to Justin's question originally. It forces the maintenance organisation to rethink. What jobs are we going to redo again? What tasks can we create? How is our plan a quality plan? Are we working it to make it so that we don't over or under service? And they're the questions we sort of end up throwing up. But a lot of businesses are probably not ready for some of those questions, but some are. And hopefully we can just, chip away and improve some of them along the way.
Yeah. Okay, guys, now that we've basically gone over the data and focusing on criticality, which is a really important piece and a great place for people to start. The next piece I want to get to, though, is getting into planning and scheduling, because this is the creation of the demand signal that completely drives the supply chain. So a lot of empathy, because this is not hard to get a business from reactive to predictive and proactive. So Mark, give us some ideas or help the people. Says, if you're completely reactive, how do you get there? What do you do?
Wow, it's a big question. I mean, I think you got to plan, but you got to work your plan. And that's the problem with a lot of businesses. They don't really. They do a plan. They think that they're doing a really great job because they can see the plan. They go through it on a Thursday. They finalise it on the Friday. But they're not really quite linked in with whether the parts are going to be there, whether they've given supply chain enough lead time to actually make certain that all those things are actually in place. Yep. It is a challenge, and I do lament for the planners and schedulers because they've got a lot of balls in the air. They've got trades coming in, they've got contractors, they've got the demand signal like you're talking about. And we did a review for a business 2 years ago, and the overall probably the biggest thing that we took away in the supply chain space, there was a couple, but the biggest one was most of the planning that was being done in the same week for the items that needed to be planned. In other words, they gave supply chain almost 1 day or 3 days lead time to actually get stuff get their components in place. It just wasn't enough. And move the plan in, move jobs in, and let's just do that. Let's do this without any perception about what they were doing. And I think obviously the service levels was really quite low. The scrambling was high. There was.
What's on the tool time? I mean, wrench time or tool time would have been, oh my God, 20s, maybe 30s if you're lucky.
Yeah, and there was a lot of those sites that there was a multi-site business. A lot of those sites had big distances between the warehouse and where they were doing their maintenance. Right,
Okay.
you know, there was almost like two full-time trucks or vehicles moving between the warehouse and the shop in order to actually get the parts to them. Because, oh shit, we've forgotten about that part, and we've got to go back and to get those things, and then it was almost like part of the process. And why is this process happening? Well, you know, look, we can't do any better, but you know they could have. And
Mark, I remember coming out of, I was at one of the mine sites for BHP. I won't mention too much detail, but I walked out, you know, pre-start, 6 a.m., and they're usually up and going by 6:30. And by 7 a.m., the line at the warehouse counter, I'm not kidding, was probably 40 people deep.
Yeah.
Because they needed to go get their parts for the job right then and there. And you've got two people at the counter in the warehouse. It would take hours for them to even get their parts. Like, what are we doing? Plan your work and we deliver. And we had unloading points, we're delivering. But still, there'd be 40 people lined up at the warehouse. I'm like, this is nuts. This is crazy.
Yeah, and I think, look, it does come down to a little bit of knowledge as well. There's some businesses I've been to in New Guinea that they thought they put the demand signal in for a kit, and then the same, a different person put the same demand in for that kit, and then they would almost go down to the warehouse and fight over it. Not your reservation. Yeah. And then they started. Then of course, then the warehouse said, "Well, we need to track like reservations and who did it and all." No,
you don't. It's planning because you get two reservations, but only one. The other one will be on the way with the purchase order, but they're unallocated. This is SAP talk again, so they're unallocated. So who gets it? And it goes back to priority and criticality, really.
Yeah, that's it, man. Yep.
And then the unfortunate part about that, because I was standing there at the time, there's one kit, two people fighting over it. And unfortunately, what had happened is that the night crew had come in and taken some components from that kit. So it was not...
The hell?
There's a lot... Where do you start with that sort of...
We go round and round. It got to a point that I started building kits myself in the warehouse because we were buying kits and then they weren't using half the parts. You couldn't return them. And then the maintenance manager, that's a waste. So we said, no, catalog them all. We'll just do a PML4 in the warehouse and we'll kit ourselves. And we kitted a week in advance. And it worked great. It says, guys, anything unused, bring it back. We credited it back in. It worked really well to kit something.
Yep.
It took 20 minutes. It was actually easy, just putting everything in a box.
Yeah.
That worked really well. But then people say, oh, it's another job. I just want to buy it. And I just want to buy the kit. It's easier. It's like, well, it's actually not.
No, sometimes. Anyway, that was another perspective. But look, I think there's a lot of improvement in identifying the plan early, determining what's important, like we talked about criticality and giving the appropriate lead time. If you're going to do a job, then actually think about it. You know, if it's going to take 2 months to get the component, think about it 3 months out in order to actually get right and give the
maybe
enough time to get it.
Oh, but so on that one, so Justin and I talk about this a lot. It's the data in the supply chains. We talked about data in the maintenance side, but so we've got data that we have to constantly update. All the materials, they're changing, the prices, the lead times, all this is changing all the time. So the better we maintain that, and then the link becomes tools like an SAP transaction at the very foundation is like IWBK to run. And when you're in a work order, run an availability check. You know, you've got. You can configure work orders, so every time you close it, it runs an automatic availability check. Why that's not in place for every company, I don't know, because then IWBK is instantly updated. Well, you've got a red light or a yellow light, guys. You're not going to be able to do that work. Why weren't you looking? Let us help you, because I can't magically make this stuff appear, or then we're going to spend thousands and thousands of dollars hot-shotting stuff, and then you don't use it because it's too late, and then you just reschedule the job, and round we go.
Yeah, totally. Just another topic, I think you're talking about reservations earlier. I had that same business, one of the businesses overseas, they had the supply chain manager approving manually, like getting a list out and approving reservations. And we tried to talk him out of that, but no, he was absolutely adamant that was his control in order to actually get the right components. And look, it was. I don't think we won that argument, but it wasn't really an argument. But we just sort of gave him other options and talked about, if you did maintain all the things you were talking about, Tim,
Yeah.
Your reorder points, your the stock levels, making certain you've got the right lead times, all those critical components inside the material master, then, you won't have to, manage every reservation and determine you've got the cash or whatever to do it. It should be straightforward. But yeah, that's the sort of level of, not user, but certainly manager that exists out there, and they need to sort of, it is a challenge because you need to invest in educating not only the people who are doing the jobs, but they're also up the chain to actually make what they're trying to do.
Well, and on that one, I was discussing with a mine site just recently, and I explained to them, I said, as soon as your work order's released and that reservation hit supply chain, the purchasing's done. It isn't approving the PO and this end. It's like it's too late because a lot of times once it has MRP, people don't approve MRP, so it's just released and it's hopefully auto purchased. If not, then it's manually purchased. But that release of the work order is the approval to spend. And I think a lot of companies don't understand that. It says in there, they're creating reservations and they change them, then they cancel them, and then they move them, and they wonder why they've got all this surplus inventory. It's like, where'd this come from? Well, you follow it back and realize, hey, they created a reservation back in April, but we've canceled it for whatever reason. But we already bought the goods because they left it open for 3 days.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, look, in maintenance, the opening or the releasing of the work order timing is a challenging piece because you need to release it in order to get those triggers all happening.
Yep.
But you also need to review the released work orders and make certain you've got them on the right date and you're actually adjusting those and working on them. And that's part of the things we sort of try to help companies with, is just making certain they don't do the work on the wrong dates and or plan for them to do them on the wrong dates.
Well, question for you then. Sorry, Justin, I keep on jumping because I'm more curious. Is when you release, does that mean it's now ready to be scheduled, or is there a separate process? You're doing your planning, I'm going to release it, and then at some point, do you hint it to scheduling, or where is the define between planning and scheduling? Even if it's the same person, where do you make the distinction?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not the right one to ask that, but certainly Tim Christensen, he's got strong views on that. But I think my understanding is that the planning should be done way out, making certain you've got forward-looking plans, you're actually thinking about components, you're thinking about lead time, all that high-level planning and when things will come in. Operations need to release the equipment as well, right? So you've got to sort of... You've got to think about all those things and when contractors can be on deck and all that. But, the schedule should really, almost schedule itself when you're thinking about next week, because what equipment's going to be parked up or brought in. You know what should be down, you know what's critical, and you should be able to schedule and move the schedule. And if you've got capacity, you should be able to move some more jobs in that if that vehicle or a fixed plant is taken down and you've got some capacity, then actually fill it up, making certain you take some opportunity while you're doing it. But it should be more focused around the schedule, rather than perhaps thinking about which they unfortunately get tied up with is I've realised now that I don't have those components, and I don't have. They get tied up in the schedulers, which is unfortunate because the planners should have already thought about that, in my view.
Yeah. Well, Justin, in oil and gas, very different environment than a big, ugly mine site. In oil and gas, in your experience, what did you guys do? Now, you had your fit session, but how did you break up that planning and scheduling bit?
We used numbered user status. So we use user statuses to do that, and that's what drove us to pick things up on a schedule or not. So, there's a ready to schedule status. So we had most work orders come out released. So that way reservations could be created, requisitions could go, however you guys do that. We don't like requisitions directly to work orders if we can help it, but
no, that's free text.
But we would use user statuses, right? So user statuses, and that tells us, like we had a status for in planning, and we had a status on waiting materials, and then we had a status for ready to schedule. So to your point, when we picked up a scheduling meeting, we would pull the status ready to schedule. Boom.
Yeah, absolutely. Should be
Looked
straightforward.
At, right? So it was just, and it was ready to rock and go. And then if the parts were there, ready to go, then we knew we could schedule it. Pretty simple, not hard to do. So, yep.
Yeah.
But it's easier said than done for sure. It's an uphill battle for sure.
And look, you got to give it to the planners and schedulers. They're often doing multiple tasks. They're often compromised. They're often left in a corner office. It's difficult. It is difficult, and they're changing shifts. And one planner comes in, one goes out, or a scheduler. So it hasn't really been thought through from a business point of view, the way that they resource it often.
Yeah, spot on. And Mark, that's why we talk a lot around like having materials planners or inventory planners to help bridge the gap for the planners or schedulers, so they don't have to worry about materials. No. That's our job. We got your back, but you just tell me when, and then there's like Justin was saying, there's very clear lines of distinction. And my job is to make sure you can have that. If I cannot get it, I'll let you know in time so you can reschedule the job later, and then I'll get the parts in and carry on. And that's a huge difference, huge pressure off the planners and the schedulers. Absolutely. So that they can focus on the people, which are more complicated. Can I get this crew in to do this work? Am I going to get the equipment from operations, which is a big problem?
Yeah. No, totally. And I think you're right. I mean, we went to a rail operator also 2 years ago, and they had materials planners or materials coordinators, and it worked pretty well. That's all they focused on, and in that business, they had, I think, 50 or 60% of their components were rotables. So repair.
Yep.
So they've got to make certain they know where they are, when they're coming back, what state they're in, all that sort of stuff. And so they were chasing down components, making certain they could get them before the schedule was sort of finally cut. And it was an important role. And unfortunately, in some of the other operations we've been to, all of that's sort of supposed to be managed by the planners and schedulers.
Well, let's talk about that again in another session. This has been really good. We could, we're talking to converted here. We could talk all day on now, but this is really good, I think, because most people are whoever's gonna watch this from a maintenance or supply chain side, they're gonna see it's the same problems everywhere. I've been all over the world, Mark, like yourself. The problems are the same. The cultures are different. That's all. The problem is the same. So with that said, Mark, thanks for joining us. We're definitely going to have you on again. It's so good to just get this banter back and forth. Plus, you're giving us material for our fight night.
Yeah, fight night. Can't wait to watch that. That'll be good.
It is good. But thanks, everybody. And we'll have some more episodes up soon. Thank you.
Cheers.
Hey, appreciate you, Mark. Take care, guys.